The summer travel season is nearly here, which means millions of people will be heading for national parks and national forests. As it turns out, a few of them won't be coming back.
Each year, hundreds of people are reported missing in our parks and forests. Most are eventually found, but there's a smaller category of cases that never get solved, including a few close to home. The I-Team's George Knapp is here with the story. George.
It's not a revelation to say that people get lost out in the wilderness or in forest areas. We're talking about a different kind of mystery, though. Disappearances that are not caused by predator attacks or criminals hiding out there in the woods or just bad luck. A former cop has put together hundreds of case files regarding clusters of missing persons in national parks where the circumstances are flat out strange. But don't expect any answers from the Park Service. The person who confided in law enforcement veteran David Paulides was a government employee who told one heck of a story about people who vanish in national parks, places like Yosemite, but also national forests, including the Toyabe, west of Las Vegas. In the years since the knock at the door, Paulides has scoured small-town newspaper archives and pestered federal agencies for records. He found so many cases of missing people that a planned book became two, filled with more than 400 cases of people who went into national parks but never came out.
People disappear in the wilds all the time, and we're talking about something different. These were unusual things that don't make sense, that happen to cluster together in 3 to 4, sometimes as many as 20, 30 people missing at one location.
The individual cases are strange enough, Paulides says, but stranger still were the reactions of federal agencies when he asked for public records.
And when we FOIA'd them, we got a response back that they don't keep any lists of missing people.
The response was not only no, but hell no, he says. So he began putting his own list together and discovered what appears to be nearly 30 clusters of disappearances in national parks and forests, cases which meet a narrow set of odd characteristics. The people who vanish often do so right under the noses of others, in many cases of kids, their parents' noses.
Being parents and being responsible people, we understand there's no way my son or daughter wouldn't know the way back from being just down the road getting the ball.
But it happens all the time.
It happens all the time.
The missing defy logic. They hike uphill, for instance, often steep climbs. Children as young as 2 or 3 are found a day or two later many miles away and over mountain ranges.
Some kids are found in phenomenal distances away that would make no logical sense to any parent.
Other aspects of this mystery are even more bizarre, though difficult to explain in just a couple of minutes. Example, many of the vanished who are found alive are kids, too young to speak, or kids who can't communicate because of disabilities. Some who are found alive say they can't remember what happened to them. In his books, David Paulides reports on why some obvious explanations simply don't apply here, but he stops short of giving his own theory or explanation. Paulides says he doesn't want to scare people away from visiting parks, but thinks people need to be made aware. A month ago, we asked the Park Service and the Forest Service for their lists of local missing persons cases. Still waiting. We have links and more information about all this stuff on our website. Check it out.
Hundreds of thousands of people visit national parks each year, but you might not realize that a number of those people go missing.
Yep.
All right, good evening. Welcome to MUFON Los Angeles. My name is Steve Murillo. I'm the State Section Director for MUFON LA. We have a very, very interesting presentation tonight, and we're crossing the line from UFOs and going into something a little bit more unusual and different. So I hope you like the presentation. We have tonight with us David Paulides. I want to tell you a little bit about David. First of all, he was on the San Jose PD Police Department for 20 years. He was trained in forensics. He was trained in investigation. Interrogation and finding out what people actually saw. So he's very good at that. He's been an investigative journalist. He's been a MUFON field investigator for the past 15 years. More recently, he's also the director of the North American Bigfoot Search, who's also responsible for authoring the Bigfoot DNA project. He makes his home in Colorado. Over the last few years, he's been doing some research, and he's come up with two interesting books, one on the West and one on the Eastern United States. He's the author of Missing 411, a series of books. And tonight he's going to be talking about that. Please give a warm welcome to our speaker, David Paulides.
Well, first of all, thanks for LA MUFON for inviting me up. There's a huge invitation. I'm being in Orange County tomorrow night talking to their group as well. But, wow, it's really a pleasure and an honor to be in front of all of you. I feel like there's an allegiance between us because I've been involved in UFO research for a long time myself. But most of the Bigfoot world doesn't know that, and I don't usually talk about it. And as Steve and I were talking earlier, it's a strange dichotomy. The Bigfoot world doesn't like the UFO world doesn't like the Bigfoot world. Yet I've written a couple articles for MUFON's journal, and I talk about the similarities between these groups, and it's phenomenal. I could take an article out of almost any journal and just put Bigfoot in instead of UFO, and I swear to you, it would look legitimate. So I'm not here to really talk about that, but I do want to say that this is an interesting time for, I think, the world. Back 7-8 years ago, when I was leaving technology, where I'd been for a number of years after leaving the police department, a couple of very, very, very wealthy people in Silicon Valley that I had worked for a number of years came up to me, and they asked me to do some things in the Bigfoot world. And having no understanding, no allegiance, no interest in Bigfoot, that kind of started me down this path. We'll talk about this. And at the end of that time in technology, I was fortunate enough to be in that boon, and I was running HR groups in Silicon Valley, and I have a master's degree from USF in that. And so dealing with people and dealing with that human element, going from 20 years in law enforcement into human resources, it's interesting the way you talk to people, the way you align with people, and if you show people respect, how far that will go. And unfortunately, in the Bigfoot world and the UFO world, there isn't a whole lot of respect for each other. And they're both, I'm telling you, the same as far as that goes. So when I was asked by these two individuals, in fact, I'll give you the background on that. Let's see. So I was leaving technology. I get called into a room by the people that are the owners of this company. And like I said, they're worth zillions. And they tell me, they said, Dave, when we were small kids, we never knew each other. But independently from one another, we were we were camping with our families in the Sierras. We might have been about the same age, we're not sure. But independently of one another, at different times in different places, we got up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom, and we saw a big, hairy biped looking at us in the middle of the night. Now, you may ask us how we ever found each other. So these two guys who had a basic interest in technology, and they found each other and they formed this company. And one day they're standing around and they're talking about strange things that happened in the woods. And they both looked open-eyed and they said, that happened to you? That happened to me. And so for this lifetime, they always wanted to get to the root of it. And they said, you know, there's been a lot of hoaxes over the years. If it's a hoax, Dave, prove it. If it's true, prove it. We'll fund it. We'll help you. You have the law enforcement background. You have the team. You have the ability to put teams together to work cohesively. Let's figure out what's true. So the formation of that was a team setting. We wanted daily conversations, the power of a group, not one individual, science-based. The most important thing to me is that people have an open mind. And I know I'm coming here from one world talking about another world, Bigfoot talking in the UFO group, but I'm telling you, you need to have an open mind about both things. Once you start to close your mind because you think you know everything, that's just about the time you really don't know enough. And when I started to get into the Bigfoot world, one of the oldest researchers came up to me and he says, Dave, the more you know, the less you're going to understand. And by gosh, that is absolutely the truth. How we came to our first location of study, which was Hoopa, a Native American reservation in Northern California, is we gathered every sighting report we could of a Bigfoot, and we put it on a giant map of the western U.S. And we wanted to find one base location to stay at that had internet access, emergency services, food services, people that claimed to be local experts, rivers and lakes in the vicinity. Those were some of the commonalities that seemed to come up when you looked at Bigfoot sightings. And so this was about a 3-month effort to put all these on a map, and we ended up in Hoopa. Hoopa has their own tribal police, which actually benefited us. The reason being is that when I went into that area for the first weekend, I walked up to a tribal policeman. I introduced myself, said I'm a retired California policeman. I'm here to do Bigfoot research. I'm not here to embarrass anybody. I'm not here to make fun of anyone. I want to get to the truth of the matter. And the guy said, stop right there. He goes, I already know you're a truthful guy. I know you'll tell the truth. I'm going to go introduce you to some of the elders tonight. And he marched me into some locations in the middle of the woods where these people lived. And he says, one of them was his grandfather. He says, Grandpa, you can trust him. Tell him the truth. And normally this takes years to break down those doors. And I was there in hours with a couple of guys. And from there, we just slowly met everybody in the reservation. And then when you're in a reservation, parts of the reservation have restricted access. We were given unlimited access to all areas. And there was one specific area in Hoopa that even the Native Americans themselves didn't go because that was their area, the Bigfoot's area. They called them OHMAH, O-H-M-A-H. So these are some of the things, and this is kind of interesting. It deals with you, is that I knew when we started this, we were going to firm these sightings up as tight as we could get them. And one way to do that is that when somebody sees something and we write the report, we write it up in the form of an affidavit, meaning that under penalty of perjury, what you're saying and what you're signing is the truth. Every sighting report we take as an organization, even today, is taken in the form of an affidavit. So when we started this, I wrote a letter to MUFON, and I gave them the formats, and I said, this is easy to do. This isn't rocket science. But it would really firm up MUFON investigations as well if when they went out, they did it in the same manner. And it's not to corner the people, it's actually to get the people to take their sighting report more seriously because they read it letter for letter to make sure it's accurate. So no other Bigfoot group does this. And I wish that MUFON would start doing it, but they won't. So Hoopa is up in Northern California. It's about 30 miles directly east of Eureka. Bluff Creek, where the famous Patterson-Gimlin Bigfoot sighting is, about 10 miles north. The Trinity River bisects the Hoopa Reservation, and I'm a big fisherman, so Trinity was great for trout, for steelhead and salmon. It's just unreal. They have a very small casino in the town that is absolutely the worst casino you will ever go in. Don't ever go there. They have horrible internet, and their hospital is questionable. But the chairman of the tribe met me about a month into it, gave us unlimited access. One thing that I always say to people when you do research, and this is a comfort thing, but we always carry firearms wherever we go, anywhere, always. And I have a marijuana grow in there, and there's a lot of marijuana grows in Northern California, and it's in that golden triangle where some of the best marijuana in the world is grown, and you just never know who you're going to walk up to in the middle of the woods. And some of the growers aren't very friendly, and some of the hikers you run into aren't very friendly. So, let's see. So the second phase is after we kind of found who we were looking for as far as credible sightings and reports, I came from that background in law enforcement where we use some of the best forensic artists in the world. And these are guys that are trained by the FBI, and it's like they have a sixth sense that I don't understand. But they could sit down with a witness who observed a suspect, say at a bank, rob the bank. They could sit down with them, and an hour later they'll have a sketch, and it was once they catch the guy, it's like the guy was in the room when the guy drew the sketch. That's how accurate these are. They are stone cold accurate. And we looked for the best guy in North America. That was Harvey Pratt. Harvey actually used to be the head of the Oklahoma Bureau of Investigation. He's now the forensic artist for the state. Has 45 years of law enforcement experience now. And he is a Native American chief. And wasn't that lucky? Because every Native American reservation we brought him into, he had instant credibility. He spoke their language, understood their rituals, their culture. It was just phenomenal. So all of the forensic sketches in the Hoopa Project and in Tribal Bigfoot were done by Harvey. So the first day, I had lined up 6 witnesses to meet with Harvey that had direct sightings somewhere as close as 10 feet. So for people that don't know the Bigfoot world, there's 2 factions. Going back 60 years, up until 6 years ago, there was a faction that believed this biped was an ape. And the new faction, when we came in, believe it's human-based. And how these guys who wrote all these books that have ape and North American ape in them came to that logic, I have no idea. And I'm not belittling them, but I truly don't understand it. Because most of them came from Canada and the Northwest, where there's a strong Native American and First Nations presence. And all you have to do is to walk into any First Nations tribe in Canada, any Native American tribe in the United States, and talk to them intelligently and respectfully, and they will tell you that it's another tribe of humans. Not one tribe I ever met said that they're animals. So why these guys never talked or gave the Native Americans or the First Nations people in Canada credit, I have no idea. But when we started to come in with the sketches at the end of the first day, we sat around looking at each other absolutely floored, because there was a profound human look to these. There was no ape look to them. And in some instances, certain Native Americans would say if you talk to them in our language, they understand. And the elders would pass that down. So the result of those 2 years up there was the Hoopa Project. And I don't believe there is room for common ground on this, because, you can quote me on this, nowhere in North America has there ever been ape hair found in the wild. There's never been ape bones found in the wild. And there's no tribe in the US or Canada that thinks they're apes. So I have a difficult time with that assessment. And we all did, everyone in our group. And we were ostracized by a large portion of the Bigfoot community because of those beliefs. And I think it was taking money out of their pockets, because no one was reading books about apes. They started to read books about people, hairy people. So after we were done with the Hoopa Project, the criticism, if there was some, was that, well, okay, that's the way they look in Hoopa, but what are they like in the rest of the world? You know, you got some little confined area, and these people have their squandered beliefs all messed up. Well, what do they look in the rest of the U.S.? Well, we were going there anyhow, and we were well on our way. And we started to march across the U.S. and started to meet with other reservations and other Native Americans and other people that just happened to have the same experiences. That ended up being tribal Bigfoot. And at about that time, we started to have the ability to collect DNA. So there's a couple big Bigfoot groups out here in the U.S. that pound their chest and scream in the woods and howl and yell. And they had a supporter for 8 years that asked them to go get Bigfoot DNA. They didn't get any. They never got any. And quietly, we were collecting it. And we didn't say anything. We just kind of kept our mouths shut and our ears open. And we went on to try to find a genetic expert to categorize the DNA. Now, there had been about 15 samples of DNA that was collected in the previous, say, 15 years and had gone to various labs. every one of those results came back as human-based. And everybody in the Bigfoot community said it was contamination. So put that little feather in your hat and think about it. So what we had to do is we had to find this genetics expert to really take this and run with it. So first thing we did is we called a number of universities and asked to get them involved. Not one university wanted to touch the topic. They all said it was a hoax, it wasn't believable, they don't exist, we don't want to get involved. Not one. So then we started to go down the path of finding a private scientist that would work for us. And we interviewed probably 4 or 5. We ended up with Dr. Ketchum. And you may say, well, of those 15 samples that came back as human, there were some big problems with that, in that they couldn't get down to the nuclear level to really find what the genetic base was on those. And the reason being is that there are some hoops you have to jump through with Bigfoot DNA that's like no other DNA in the world. And it really took Dr. Ketchum two and a half years to figure it out. It was not easy. And if not for her persistence, the project never would have come to fruition.
Story to talk to you about. Bigfoot, it turns out, is real. According to one group of researchers, they say that they may have DNA to prove it. Look at these pictures. You can see for yourself, obviously. That is Sasquatch, and it is real. We told you first last week about these folks at the Sasquatch Genome Project. They presented these photos in Texas, and they claim to have tissue samples, DNA, blood, hair, video evidence of what they say is a female Bigfoot human hybrid creature. They say they found it in the backwoods of Kentucky. Joining us now is Dr. Melba Ketchum, a genetic scientist with the Sasquatch Genome Project. Doctor, welcome. Good to have you here.
Thank you.
So tell me,
for having me.
you know, I mean, we've all been watching this movie since we were kids, you know, seeing the male version sort of stalking through the woods and looking very real. But, you know, I think most folks have a lot of skepticism, I think it's safe to say, about all this. How come you don't?
Oh, well, I didn't believe in them when I started the study. I had no idea that I would find anything novel at all. I really believed that they would be I would disprove it instead. But it all changed when I had some samples come in that were a little bit different.
Melba Ketchum has been attempting to get DNA on what could very well be Sasquatch, and has been very successful in taking more than 100 samples of blood, tissue, hair, and other types of specimens. Dr. Melba Ketchum, of course, is the founder of the DNA Diagnostics, established back in 1985, and it is a leader in all types of DNA testing, including human. Dr. Melba Ketchum is with us for a moment here on Coast to Coast. Melba, I hear that there might be a breaking story here with the DNA, and I thought I'd pull you on for a little bit and chat with you about it.
Right. Well, it seems that now we're going to be vindicated after all the pain we've suffered over this. We actually now have knowledge that there are other people out there that have now gotten the same results we did, that, you know, Bigfoot is indeed a human hybrid, just like we've said. And I don't know when they'll come out with it or how they'll come out with it, but it'll come out. And, you know, it's done. And it's very exciting because everybody kept saying, oh, it's just contaminated, or, oh, I did this wrong or that wrong. And I knew we didn't. We used 12 labs. We did everything we could to make sure that everything was pristine about it. The scientific community, you know, scoffed at us, or they just didn't say anything, and tried to discredit me in every way, and in our team, for that matter. And now it's come full circle, and people that are, you know, very qualified have now independently. I didn't even know, you know, this particular lab was doing it. I know there's a couple of them working on it, but this one has already finished it.
Well, it's exciting when it happens, and I know you put in a lot of work, Melba.
It's exciting, and, you know, like I say, I already, you know, it felt like 1,000 pounds came off of me, because I was like, I know how hard we worked to make sure our data was pristine, but, you know, to have it completely independently verified, you know, by a very good organization, that is just, you know, that made me feel so good.
Okay, and I'm assuming the organization's going to let you know right before they make their official release. So would you let us know?
I don't know, probably, but I don't know.
I think they will. I think they will.
I think they will, but, you know, that's up to them. It's their study, and I in no way want to tread on it other than the fact that it supported everything we had, and you know, I don't think anybody, it's going to be the worst cover-up ever and very poorly done if they try to deny it now, because you can't have independent labs doing independent testing that come up with exactly, I mean, down to small details, the same result.
Exactly. Dr. Ketchum, thanks so much.
Everything.
Okay, and we've got your website, part of our Twitter feed at coasttocoastam.com. Thank you so much, and let's keep in touch. Dr. Melba Ketchum was on with George Knapp several months ago. It's an incredible story. DNA samples.
So one thing in tribal Bigfoot that Harvey Pratt, is that picture on the bottom right is an artist's rendering of the Bigfoot in the Patterson-Gimlin film. It's a very good picture. Well, one of the things Harvey does is when somebody walks into a bank to rob a bank and they have a beard on and long hair, Harvey has the ability to take the beard off so you can see what kind of face it is. So I'm not going to show you the face here, but I will tell you that when he took the facial hair off, it looked just like a Native American. And that picture is in tribal Bigfoot. So once you start to do research on any topic, if you think you're the smartest person in the lot, you're going to fail. Well, I understand what I don't know, and there's a lot. But there was a researcher named Ray Crow, and Ray is still around. He owned a Bigfoot group in Oregon. And part of that first 3 months we did is we read every book you could find out there, probably over 120 about Bigfoot. All the researchers read them. And Ray had something called the Track Record. And it involved a monthly newsletter that went out for 17 years. It had some of the best information in it of anything anywhere. And Ray was retiring, and we went in and we bought his entire collection of research that went over 25 years. And that really helped us understand a lot of the mechanics and things. One thing that Ray wrote about that you will be interested in is there's a Native American reservation in Washington in Colville, and they had certain lights that appeared in the mountains around their reservation continuously for years. Also, just as a happenstance, it's probably one of the hottest, and still is, Bigfoot sites in the world. And Ray would never come out and say, oh, A equals B equals C. But if you were smart enough to kind of read his track record, you could kind of understand that there were similarities and there were lines together that kind of put the Bigfoot in the same location as the lights, and it was very interesting.
Vannak yeti kutatók, akik felfigyeltek arra, hogy az UFO aktivitás és a jetik felbukkanása között szoros összefüggés van. Mi több, szemtanúk azt állították, hogy látták, ahogy a jetik kiszállnak a földön kívüliek repülőcsésze aljából.
1980-ban több állatcsonkításos esetben nyomoztam, amikor kaptam egy levelet a Washington állambeli Snohomisból. Egy férfi írta, aki már akkor is híres volt a yeti megfigyeléseiről. A fickó azt állította, hogy az apja háza melletti erdőben volt, amikor valami furcsa zajra lett figyelmes. Körülnézett, és meglátta, hogy a fák között egy repülő csészehaj közeleg. Ezt követően a furcsa jármű aljából ezüstös fénycsóva bukkant elő, és a fénycsóvában ott állt egy hatalmas, torzomborz, majomszerű lény. Az óriás elindult a fák felé, és tudomást sem vett a férfiról, aki ott állt a közelében. Ezután a környékről több bejelentés is érkezett megcsonkított állatokról.
So what we did is we put the track record, we got a grad student put the track record on a CD. It's 3,000 pages long, a 70-page index. And for anyone who is interested in research on Bigfoot and UFOs, that thing is phenomenal. It's online. You can buy it through our store. Just what I said to you about Bigfoot hair coming back. This was an article written in the mid-'80s talking about hair. I know there's some Native Americans here from the Tule River Reservation. I got permission from the tribal chairman to go in. And they have a kind of a cave, big rock location. And they had University of California archaeologists come in and date these pictographs at 1,500 to 2,000 years. And it befuddles me that you could think that those were anything other than a Bigfoot. See the long hands, both sides. There's a couple of different pictures of them inside the reservation in this area of the rock that are a little better than this. We have all the pictures online at our website, and you can kind of get a better pic for them. But some of the elders we talked to on the sites were very informative, very interesting. Again, if you're not respectful and you're not willing to really learn, you're not going to get access to these things. And so we did learn. Now, when you're doing research on a topic, it's not always important what's happening today, but you'll save yourself a lot of time if you go back and you study history. That's why we study history in school, so we don't make the same mistakes like our government doesn't make, right? But the truth of the matter is that we spent a lot of time going back through the archives of a lot of newspapers that nobody ever looked at. And I can guarantee you for a fact, you've never seen what I'm going to show you tonight unless you've read my books. What happened is that in 1924, there's a group of hikers out, and they get approached by some tall, hairy Bigfoots, and they get rocks thrown at them. They don't get hurt. They kind of just get harassed out of the area. And they go tell the local sheriff, and there was a group of people that saw it. Sheriff believes something's up, so the sheriff's putting together a posse to go out and hunt these things and kill them. Now, what happened is that 3 Native American tribes got together and they held a press conference. That's what this article's about. And I have to tell you, if you think back to 1924, the Native Americans probably weren't held in the highest of esteem and held to the highest level of credibility. And I don't know why, but they just weren't. So for these 3 tribes to come together and hold a press conference and say, and that's what this article says, it's in the book, it says, this is a tribe of people, don't go out and hunt them, they have their own language, they have certain abilities you and I don't have, they're much stronger and much faster than you and I, and if you get them really mad, they could hurt you very bad. And they went on and they talked about the abilities to mimic animals in the woods, like owls and coyotes and things. Now, if you have a belief system that these things are apes, and you're a researcher, you're never going to pull this one out. And it's not just this one. We have many of these that go back 50, 60, 70, 80 years. And I think this is pretty strong evidence that they're not apes, especially when you start to think about the language part of it. Now, there's a portion of our website that is all about Bigfoot language. And one of the smartest guys I've ever met is a guy named Scott Nelson. And Scott was a crypto-linguist specialist for the Department of the Navy. He's one of these guys that sat in a room in Florida, and he listens to secret conversations going on between the Russians and Cuba and the U.S. And, I mean, some of his stories are just great. Well, he just happened to get involved in the Bigfoot world because he heard that there were some tapes out there that said that this was Bigfoot language. And he spent almost a year breaking it down to a series of verbs, adverbs, nouns, pronouns. And he goes, that's a language. And that pretty much turns the corner from animal to human.
Here's tonight's Faces of Kansas City. What Scott Nelson hears in his headphones is strange
disturbing, and unexplainable all at once.
You're convinced Bigfoot exists?
Yes. I've heard him speak. And you will hear him speak here in a moment.
Before you pass judgment on Nelson, let me tell you a little of his past. He retired from the Navy after a 17-year career as a cryptolinguist, intercepting Russian communications and decoding them. Currently, Nelson is a professor at Wentworth College in Missouri.
Because of what I did in the Navy, you know, spending years, several thousand hours speeding the human voice up and slowing it down, and I detected language in those vocalizations.
Those vocalizations were captured on audio tape in the Sierra Nevada mountains by a group of hunters in the early 70s.
Right here is a juvenile.
Nelson came across them a few years ago while helping his son write a paper on Bigfoot.
I said, Stevie, there's language here. And he said, Dad, how can that be? It sounds like a bunch of apes fighting to me. And I said, well, we have to slow it down like Dad used to do in the Navy.
Right.
But
listen for yourself.
I'm just going to let it roll.
Nelson says he instantly knew 3 things about the sounds he was hearing. 1, that he was hearing a language. 2, that it was not human. And 3, that it was not fake. It was at that point that he became a Bigfoot believer and researcher.
The number of reports have increased. I think it's becoming more and more accepted for people to come out and say, hey, I had this strange experience. It terrified me, and I need to talk about it.
What is that?
In fact, Bigfoot has never been bigger.
But the high school student who shot the video doesn't seem to be looking for attention. He asked us not to show his face or give his name.
There seems to be new amateur video of Sasquatch turning up more and more frequently.
A big, gigantic, hairy, wild man.
Somewhere in Missouri.
Throughout Missouri. The reports go back over 100 years.
Nelson says there have been numerous reports of Bigfoot activity up and down the Missouri River corridor.
There are 2 places in Missouri. One right here 10 minutes away called Monkey Mountain. Now there's a reason why the pioneers called that place Monkey Mountain.
Okay, I'll reiterate what I said earlier. Believe it or not. Now Scott has offered to take me to the nearby location.
So the again, another article about the newspaper called it Gorilla Men, the Claylam Indians and the others that were involved called them humans. Ventriloquists, they steal Indian women and babies at times. They actually killed a branch of the Claylam Indians that tried to kill one of theirs. They have hypnotic power, they talked about, where if they look at you and they stare at you in a certain way, you can kind of lose time and space. It was quite an interesting article. So part of the research as we were doing the Hoopa project up in Northern California, we found this book written by Lucy Thompson in 1916. Very well written. She was a very smart Yurok woman. The Yuroks and the Hoopa all live kind of in the same area. And she wrote about life on the Klamath. She married a miner, and they ended up having kids. But she talked about something called Indian devils. And tribes in certain areas have certain names for your Bigfoot. In that area, they called them Indian devils. How they'd come down into their community during the day when the warriors were out getting food, and they would take women, sometimes they'd take children, sometimes they'd take food. And then they would go off. They'd go up into the woods, and sometimes they'd cannibalize them and eat them, and other times they'd take them for procreation. She talks about this. And she talks about how the tribe knew where they were sometimes by smoke way up in the mountains where they knew nobody else would be. Somebody asked me, they said, well, does Bigfoot use fire? I said, well, I think Bigfoot did, but I think they're smart enough to understand now that by using fire, that gives away their location. So they've learned to live without it. And when you read her book, it definitely did indicate that they used fire to sometimes cook up people and eat them.
The oldest account of Bigfoot was recorded in 986 AD by Leif Erikson and his men. During their first landing in the New World, the Norsemen wrote about monsters that were horribly ugly, hairy, swarthy, and with great black eyes. But the legend of Bigfoot existed in North America long before the white man arrived. The zealous Indian tribes of British Columbia called the creature Sasquatch, meaning wild man of the woods. Among the legends are the stories of the giant men of Mount Shasta and the stick men of the Washington Mountains. Here in the Hoopa Valley, located in the Klamath Mountains of Northern California, Bigfoot sightings are common. For hundreds of years, the Hoopa Indians have told stories about what they call Oma. Jimmy Jackson has lived in the Hoopa Valley for 85 years and knows the legend of Bigfoot well.
My mother lived to be 105 years old, and she's told me a lot of things about Bigfoot, you know. It's a person that takes care of the mountains, nothing around in the valley. He's out in the mountain, and he's the boss. And you never see him. You never see him.
I think it's real possible. As pioneers headed west, more and more sightings of Bigfoot were recorded by white men. In 1840, E. Walker, a missionary to the Spokane Indians in Washington, wrote a fascinating letter. Walker describes a race of giants that live in the mountains.
They hunt and do all their work at night. They frequently come in the night and steal their salmon from their nets and eat them raw. But the people are awake. They always know when they are coming very near by their strong smell, which is most intolerable. E. Walker.
This is interesting. Years and years ago, this book came out, and I put it up here because, to me, that doesn't look like an ape. That looks like a Native American. And I know everyone else has an opinion about it, but I don't think it has ape features. And I put that picture here because that was written, I think, in the early 60s. Again, some of the things I've talked about before. Giant human bones have been found in various locations of the United States. And you can hear about them every once in a while in science. But again, never any ape bones, never any gorilla bones, never any of that kind of hair ever found. This is George Haas. He was a founder of what's called the Bay Area Research Group in the 60s and 70s. One of the smartest men. All of their research is online on our website. You could access it for free. It's phenomenal reading. They were light years ahead of their time. They knew exactly what we were dealing with. One of their guys worked at the Oakland Naval Hospital, and he was a foot expert. And he wrote about how the foot of a Bigfoot mimics the foot of a human with some slight variations, but it's phenomenal reading. His name was Archie Buckley, Chief of Medicine and Rehab at VA. But that report's online as well. This is just what Archie wrote about the Bigfoot and how it ambulates and how it works itself. And I won't go into the details of that. So the white paper is out. The DNA results are out. Before I go any further, and 2/3 of this is going to be about the missing people part of this puzzle that has nothing to do with Bigfoot. But before I leave Bigfoot, let me ask you, and there may be some questions. Is there some questions about Bigfoot or the Bigfoot DNA project that I can clear up? Yes, sir. I'm sorry, this guy right here.
Last night, coast to coast the night before, an application said 2 universities had passed the DNA, but they said to have their names taken off it.
2 labs had passed it.
Yeah. Well, however many, but she said they wanted their names taken off it, but they passed it. DNA can't lie. Can't we just go ahead with the names? Look, they've already said this, the writing's on the wall.
True, but what happened was that when we submitted the samples, if we told people, certain labs, what they were dealing with, they wouldn't test it. So we wouldn't tell them. We'd say, hey, this is some DNA we found, we're not sure where it's from. And they would have fits with it. And they did have fits with it until Melba stepped in and told them certain things. In the back? Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. Oh, absolutely, yes. Hypertrichosis. Hypertrichosis is a genetic issue with us humans where they grow hair over their body. You sometimes see these people in circuses and things. It's totally different than what we're dealing with. Anybody else? Yes, sir, front row.
Any legitimate photographic evidence outside of Patterson film?
I think so. We have one of our researchers, Scott Carpenter, just released an online book today. It's on our website, the access to it. I've worked with Scott numerous times in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Only time I've ever seen a Bigfoot was with him. He submitted over 30 DNA samples. The guy's phenomenal. And some of the pictures you're going to see in his book, I guarantee are legitimate. And when I talk to people and I say, don't think that Bigfoot has one appearance. If I stood everybody up here in this room in a line, there's some variations in the way you and I look that are huge. And I think the same applies to the Bigfoot world. You're going to have big ones, small ones, fat ones, skinny ones, and some with hair on the face, some without hair on the face. The ones in the Great Smoky Mountain National Park, they got a really strange look. They almost have a raccoon look. Right around the eyes, it's white, and everything else is black. So, somebody else? Yes, sir.
No? Yeah, I'm just not clear on what the genetic testing found.
So, it's a subspecies of people, of humans, not exactly human, but just a fraction off. And I'm not a geneticist, and to explain that difference, I can't do it real well. But I could say on that genetic scale, they're way, way close to humans. They're nothing close to animals. Sir?
So all the big feet, say around the world, the Yeti, the ones in Florida, they're all then one big family of related species of Bigfoot?
I couldn't say that. We concentrated on North America. So I really can't speak to the other stuff. Yes, sir. Sir. Yes, the hat.
Can you discuss a little bit the peer review process on the paper? There's a lot of information out there, whether or not it was self-published and what's going on with that aspect of the publication.
So the idea was at the beginning to just find the DNA and to expose it. And then Dr. Ketchum said, Dave, we're getting enough samples that we could actually write a scientific white paper about this. A white paper means that you submit it to a scientific journal, and a group of scientists get together and look at your research and give you a peer review on how you did, and if they believe it's acceptable, then they print it in their journal. Fact, probably the first time this is ever publicly stated, a few of those journals that were submitted that white paper never read it and refused it. And how do I know? Because the questions that they asked proved that they never read it. Dr. Ketchum and that team were treated so wrong, and it was either a political move because it wasn't academia that came in with these results, or it's that they didn't want to even touch the topic. But talk about a complete fraud. Fact. Yes?
I have read all 4 of your books, and which is why I was surprised you said there was no, you were going to leave the Bigfoot and go into the 411. I also did read what you had online about the results of the DNA, which was very interesting, and I believe Dr. Ketchum was on Coast to Coast recently.
Sunday night.
And what she was saying, there were 3, I guess, varieties, if you will, and some being more docile, more friendly, some being more aggressive. Doesn't that kind of fit into what your findings were in some of the cases in the 411 books?
So one thing I've never done is I've never said what the root cause of those disappearances are. And I won't. And the reason being is that I've met too many of those parents of those kids that have disappeared. And you may have a certain understanding of this world that most of the people in the world don't have. And that's really a pat on your back. And if you ever lost a loved one, and I don't mean dying, I mean disappearing, and you never knowing what happened to them, there's no worse fate. And I'll talk about an interview, I'm going to talk about this in a little bit, an interview I did with a boy that disappeared from Great Smoky Mountains National Park. And I interviewed his dad. His name was Dennis Martin. And I can tell you, it never touched 20 years worth of law enforcement when I had the interview with that dad about his son. The pain that that man has gone through for 50 plus years, getting lied to by the Park Service, lied to by the press, it's phenomenally disgusting. I walked away, myself and Scott Carpenter walked away from there with big tears in our eyes because there's nothing we can do for him. But when Missing 411 was written, and I'll get into that in just a second, but it didn't start with a Bigfoot presence. It didn't end with a Bigfoot presence. I never indicated in the books what the cause was, even though you're going to read some absolute crap online saying, oh yeah, I named Bigfoot as the cause. There's nowhere in that book I ever stated what the cause of these things was. So I'm going to get into that. I don't mean to belittle your question because it was a good question, but I don't want anyone to think, and I don't want it to ever leave the room, that I'm saying what the cause was of those disappearances. 2 more questions. Yes, sir.
I'm a novice to this subject. But
so am I, so we have some in common.
So I've seen the Patterson photograph, and you're saying that you believe, and you've seen other credible photographs that you believe and take for granted to our actuality?
So I'm 120% positive the Patterson-Gimlin film is real. And I think that there are other credible... Yes. Yes. Yeah. Yes.
Are there segments of the U.S. government that are aware of this Bigfoot phenomenon and choose to keep it also, being in the black backspace and not giving credibility?
Oh, yes. Absolutely they are. I'll go to my grave with that one. And I'm not the big conspiracy theorist guy, but for a fact they know. Okay. How many people have read that book? Okay, a few. Honestly, I think it's one of the best books out there right now. And I know both of these men. George is a really good friend. And Colm Kelleher actually helped write the Bigfoot DNA project. A lot of people don't know that. He contributed in a big way. But what's important about this book, in my view, is that certain things that happened at the ranch, mimic what happens in the Bigfoot world. And I think that certain aspects of the aerial phenomena that occurred would hit a big cue with you and your knowledge as well. And the credibility of the people that were at the ranch documenting the incidents was impeccable. They hired a group of retired FBI agents to write up exactly what occurred. And you talk about credible witnesses, there's nothing more credible than them in my mind. And if only one half of that book is factual, to me it'll change the paradigm of the average citizen if they read it. So if you get one thing out of me today, don't buy my books. Go buy that book and read it. So, the 2 books I've written about missing people. About 4 years ago, I was at a national park, and I was doing some peripheral research. And at the end of the day, I went to a lodge off the park's entrance. And late that night, not late, 7:30 or 8 o'clock, I get that knock on the door. And there's 2 people standing there, and they say, hey, we're from the Park Service. And I think, okay, here it comes. They're going to really try to fry me. I said, no, we know who you are. We know your research. We've actually read your books, and we want to talk to you. I said, okay, come on in. And they lay out this story of people that have disappeared at parks they've worked at in their career. And both these individuals had been around 15, 20 years and had worked at 3 or 4 different parks. Now listen carefully to what they say. They say that, yeah, they think that there's an abnormal amount of people that disappear at their parks. And on the front end, there's a lot of publicity. And on the back end, there's no publicity. And there's no follow-up. And it's almost as though nobody cares. And they said, we can't actually state that something weird is going on, but we think it's unusual, and we're surprised that the Park Service isn't doing something about it. And we think you should really look into it because we think there's a big story here. And so we talked about it more, and they named a couple of locations. The next morning when I drove out, I called a couple of law enforcement guys I know, and I laid it out for them, and I said, hey, just do some peripheral research and try to figure out if there's big numbers missing from these locations. And son of a gun, they called me for an hour, and they said, hey, there's something big, big, big here. And the biggest thing right away that we found out is that if you go to the website of any municipal law enforcement agency in the western U.S. that's moderate in size, we're not talking huge, just moderate in size, on that law enforcement website, there's going to be a section about missing people. The National Park Service has a contingent of federally trained law enforcement officers. These aren't guys and ladies that go pick up garbage at the campsite. These are federally trained, better trained than most of the guys that work in the cities around here, federal law enforcement officers, and then they have another category called special agents that do all the follow-up on their work. Those are like the detectives. So right away, we couldn't find any information about missing people inside the Park Service. Kind of odd. And when I got back, I made some inquiries, filed the Freedom of Information Act request, probably over 50 of them by now, and things only got more murky. And as we started to work on this, we started to figure out that there were clusters of disappearances in North America. Even more weird. And the way we found this out is we filed the Freedom of Information Act against the Park Service, asking them for a list of the missing people inside their system. Now, I could teach anybody in this room how to keep track of missing people in 15 minutes or less with a clipboard and a binder paper. The date they disappeared, their name, the location. That's it. You don't need some massive computer system. You don't need some interlink system. There is your tracking device for the park. Park Service comes back and says, we don't have any list of missing people from any of our parks or anywhere in our system. So initially, 3 of us in a room looked at each other and said, this has got to be some kind of semantical error on our part. We just wrote this wrong. So we had another researcher write it in a different way. And about 3 weeks later, we get a response back, no, we understood your first request. We don't have any lists of missing people. So I called the head of the Freedom of Information Act for the Park Service in Denver. Very nice lady. Charis, C-H-A-R-I-S Wilson. Very nice. Very helpful. She goes, Dave, it's embarrassing to say we don't have any lists according to the parks. I said, none? None. I said, okay, now I'm going to start pulling some strings here. I've written 2 books, published 2 books from a fairly big name publisher. So according to the Freedom of Information Act, I can get what's called a publisher's and author's exemption to any costs incurred when I make a request under FOIA. So I requested that, and I asked for a list of all missing people inside their system and all missing people from Yosemite National Park. 6 weeks later, I get a call from an attorney in the Park Service. I know something weird is going on. Mr. Paulides, we got your request, and we're going to charge you. We're not going to respond or authorize the author's exemption. I said, why not? Well, we looked, and we have determined that your books aren't in enough public libraries to qualify. I said, can you point to where that is in the FOIA? We're not going to address that. It's nowhere in FOIA. That is not one of the criteria. It says published author. So he says, but we can come up with that list from all of our parks. And we can come up with that list from Yosemite for you. From Yosemite, that list is going to cost you $34,000. And the list from our parks is going to cost you $1.4 million. This isn't a joke. So I put him on the speakerphone. I said, say that again. Some of the guys, all law enforcement guys are sitting in the room. After we got off the phone, we said, we were even more determined than ever because we knew something is really, really wrong. And so there started the next 3 years of us camping out wherever we could to find archived information on missing people. And we just honed in, first of all, on Yosemite because it was in our backyard. And that is the cluster of the largest mass of disappearances in the wilds of North America anywhere. And folks, I'm not talking about mountain climbers who disappeared on the side of El Capitan, people who fell into rivers, people who were suicidal. All of those were eliminated. We're looking for a specific type of disappearance which can't be answered. We're talking about the true whodunits. Nothing like this has ever been done before. So, talk about the rangers. Initially, lots of publicity, then none. No tracking mechanism for all the distant people, and the attitude of their own national park system wasn't correct. Also, another thing, people that disappear inside national parks, 80% of the time you'll never find them on a database, anywhere in North America as a missing person. Why? That's not right. So, after you look at thousands of cases of missing people, certain criteria kind of start falling out, and we started to recognize them. And it took a lot of cases. First of all, start with, it's a rural location. Dogs were involved in a lot of the disappearances, meaning the people disappeared with a dog, the dog disappeared with the person. Dogs were involved one way or another. Strange one, and I'll talk about this. This year, I was invited to give a presentation just like this in front of the National Association of Search and Rescue Professionals at Harvey's Lake Tahoe this last summer. 3,000 people from all across North America. 2 of their administrators read my books, and they said, Dave, you got to talk. And I'm telling you, I hit a bone with them. These people have canines that track. Sometimes they're concerned when they don't want to track. And when I say one of the criteria of this study is that the canines decide, we're not tracking. Sometimes they walk in a tight circle and lay down. Handlers came up to me afterwards and go, oh my God, I thought it was just my dog, but I couldn't understand why they were acting like that. There was supposedly a good scent, and they didn't want anything to do with it. That's part of it.
But wounding or killing a Bigfoot may prove difficult, according to Craig Carpenter, a Mohawk Indian and mystic.
He is a spirit, and he can materialize or dematerialize at will. And he does it. There's much testimony to that. People have shot him. He'd scream and holler and fall down. They try to follow the blood trail. The blood trail peters out. After a while, even the tracks peter out. He just dematerializes. There's reports, reliable reports, of him walking in the wintertime on a snowy field. In the middle of the field, his tracks just disappear. So it's a super magic man. There's nobody more magical than Bigfoot that I know of.
They have magic. Magic able to disappear. Because even when the non-natives, they chase this thing, I noticed that the natives, that the Indian people, when we see it, we kind of get scared of it. But yet, we don't bother it.
He lives underground, and he comes out only at nighttime. If he doesn't, if you put a light on them, they'll disappear in the woods. They even had helicopters, to look for it. They never did find it. And there's that It just disappeared in the river bottom.
And so it knows it's in danger, and it uses its magic to get away. A part of a hypnosis stage that it puts people in, and to where it could be standing right there in front of you, and you still will.
An abnormal amount of the people that disappear have a disability, some kind of disability or mental impairment. When the normal person's found, an abnormal amount have a fever. And it's very rare when we can find a reporter that went into that detail, but some of them did and actually interviewed a physician at the hospital, and the physician said, yeah, they have something wrong, they have a fever. The victim is found in a conscious or unconscious or semi-conscious state. Highly unusual, but it happens with this study. The people disappear in the afternoon or early evenings. Swamps and briar patches are commonly associated along with berries. When the victim is found, clothing is removed or shoes are removed. Missing found in an area previously searched. This is a huge one. You interview search and rescue people and they say, we searched that area 30 times. We were in that surrounding area all day and night for 3 weeks, and then all of a sudden they showed up there. How? We have no idea. The victim can't or won't remember what happened. This diagram on the right, commit it to memory. Those boys have never been found, and they disappeared in the wilds of North America. Top left, Douglas Legg from New York, 1971, was with his family, super wealthy family, near the Adirondacks in New York, on a family vacation, disappeared. They brought in the Green Berets to search for him. They tracked him supposedly over 50 miles around the outskirts of Lake Placid, New York, and back down the other side through the roughest part of the high mountain peaks in New York. Never found him. Canines tracked him there. The searchers were on it, and they said, we can't believe this kid went there. We can't believe it, but the dogs are on it. Dennis Johnson, 66, from Yellowstone Park. One of the strangest disappearances I've ever researched. It's in the book. He was with his family. He and his sister disappeared simultaneously. His sister reappears. They go out and they search for the Dennis for weeks. For some reason, they couldn't find any tracks. Never found. Dennis Martin, 7 years old, Great Smoky Mountain National Park. Never, ever found. No tracks or nothing. One of the most recent ones is Sammy Belkey, middle left, Crater Lake National Park. Was with his dad. Sammy had a disability, a mental disability. Derek Engbertson, Crater Lake National Park. Edward Nye, Crater Lake. Those three boys in the middle, all Crater Lake. What's unusual about that? You look at their ages and you look at their sexes, and there is something about the clusters that we identify in the books. Some clusters are old people. Some clusters are young boys. Some are girls. There's a consistent element in each one of those clusters that's highly, highly suspect. Bottom left, Dickie Sudine, Mid-Sierras in Northern California. James Bordenkircher, Mid-Sierras. He disappeared from North Lake Tahoe, from his parents' kind of a rural location right on the Nevada border, still missing. And Travis Zweig, Southern California, Pinyon Pines, disappeared. Now, I'm going to tell you that I want everybody in this room to take that paradigm you have about missing people and throw it in the garbage can right now. These boys right here, how many people in this room have kids? First of all, raise their hand so I have an idea how many parents. If you have a son or a daughter and they've lived through that 5, 6, 7-year-old age bracket, you know how far that kid can go, how far they're going to walk. And the stories about some of these kids that disappear is too phenomenal to believe. When you talk to search and rescue people, there isn't one I've ever met that said that they shouldn't be able to find a 6-year-old boy that disappears in the wild. Now, animal attack has been eliminated from this. If there's an attack on a child by an animal, there's going to be a scene. There's going to be blood. There's going to be hair. It's going to be obvious, and the canines will hit on it. That's not what happened here. In this diagram right here, the boys were 2 to 14. 3 boys were 8 years old. This is about women who disappeared now. Teresa Breyer, Shut-Eye Peak, kind of up above Fresno in the Sierras. Stacy Arras. That one right there, I will never give up on this case. I lived in Los Gatos, California for about 20 years, Northern California, right outside of San Jose. Stacy lived in Saratoga. And right when we started on this, that was one of the first cases that I got hit with. It was in '81. She was with her dad, and they were in the high Sierras of Yosemite riding horses into a backcountry area with 6 other people. They ride up to these cabins that are in the middle of nowhere, and they had rented them with the backpacker and the horseman. They get off their horses. Stacy and her dad go into one of the cabins that they're sharing. And she comes out with her dad, and she says, "Hey, Dad," she's got her camera. She goes, "I'm going to go over to this point right here. I'm going to take some pictures, and I'm going to go with this other man, a 71-year-old man who was on horseback." She and the 71-year-old man walk 20, 30 yards out to this point, and they sit down on a boulder. She's taking pictures with him. Everyone can see them. They're not very far away. In this portion of Yosemite, there's a lot of boulders of granite, a lot of just straight granite. She tells this man, she goes, "I'm going to walk down to that lake right there and take some pictures of the lake 200 yards away." Okay. So her dad and everybody sees Stacy walk by herself down to the lakes. That was the last time Stacy was ever seen. I talked to her uncle, who was part of the search team, and they said, "Dave, we searched for a month. Only one thing we ever found, and that is right at the entrance to the lake area when they were walking in amongst the trees, they found the lens cap to her camera sitting on laying on the trail. Last thing they ever found." Now, what's important about this case is that I've made a Freedom of Information Act request for the Park Service for this case file. Every other case file from the Park Service where I name the person and the location and the date, if I spoon feed it to them, if I lead them to it, I'll get it. I lead them to this case, and they say, "No, you can't have it." I said, "What? I've never had that happen." And they said, "No, we're not going to release that case." I said, "Give me an explanation." "No, we're not going to give you one." A week later, I get a call at home from the special agent in Yosemite that has this case. His last name was Yu, Y-U. I'll never forget it. Yu says, "Mr. Paulides, why do you want this case?" Violation of federal law and the Freedom of Information Act. The government entity that you're filing the Freedom of Information Act against cannot use your reason as a rationale to give you the case or deny the case. It's irrelevant to them. I said, "Hey, Special Agent Yu, I'm going to be polite. I'm an ex-law enforcement guy, but that's an inappropriate question. You can't ask it. I can ask anything I want." Okay. So I want this because I'm writing a book. We're keeping track of missing people. I want to understand the circumstances of how Stacy disappeared. He says, "Well, she disappeared. What else you want to know?" I said, "Is this a missing persons case or is this a criminal investigation?" Two different types of cases in the law enforcement world. If there's a crime involved, it's a criminal investigation. Missing people is not a crime. Now, if there's a suspect in the disappearance, then it's kidnapping or abduction. Now it's criminal again. So I ask him that. He says, "No, straight missing persons case." Okay, are there any suspects? No. Has anyone touched the file in the last 15 years? Not that I can tell. I said, "Then what's the reason you're denying me access?" "Yep, we just made a decision that on this one you're not going to get it." Okay, so I appealed through my congressman, and I got denied again. So I went to her uncle and I said, "Hey, why would they be denying me this?" And he says, well, have you gotten other cases? I said, I have a stack in my room that's 10 feet tall. And he says, I have no idea, Dave. And to this day, I have never seen that case file. I wrote about it. I wrote about the elements I just told you. And we accumulated probably 20 different articles so we could kind of piece the story together. What happened to Stacey Harris? I don't know. But it's troublesome when a federal agency says they have to give you information and they won't. If I had the money, I'd probably take them to federal court and sue them for access. We don't have that kind of money. Lynn Olson in the middle left, I write about her. She disappeared from Wyoming. She was staying at her parents' or her grandparents' dude ranch. She went down to a lake to take a summer swim, disappeared. They found a pile of her clothes under a tree, never found her again. She wasn't in the lake. Marjorie West was picking wildflowers, disappeared in Pennsylvania. Anna Waters disappeared from Half Moon Bay, California. Very strange disappearance. Thelma Melton, Great Smoky Mountain National Park. Gloria McDonald disappeared from a state park in Arkansas. And Ruth Jacobs disappeared from Amador County in California. And those are 9 of the biggest whodunits you'll ever see. But there's 400 of those cases that we write about in both books. People should never disappear and not be found. Grab that thought. If somebody disappears in the wilds up there in the hills, they should always be found. Because once somebody dies, after about 1 week, your body starts to gas up, it gives out specific odors, and canines can actually pick out a body that's decomposing under the water and are giving out minute amounts of bubbles. They can pick out the body on top of the water. So to not find a body after weeks, let alone days, it's very strange. Most disturbing of everything we found is that in Pennsylvania, 29 children 10 years or younger went missing there from 1880 to 1957. In 1941 alone, 3 children vanished 5 months apart and were never found. There is no state in the United States where there are so many children missing and never found. Ever, anywhere. There are actually clusters. We made the entire state of Pennsylvania a cluster. There are actually clusters inside the state where these kids have disappeared. I've had hundreds of emails about this since people read the books, different hypotheses and things, nothing really concrete, nothing solid, but it is very, very strange. Again, the continuity in these disappearances, the commonalities that occur are mind-boggling. It's almost as though you're reading the same report time after time after time where the elements of these people have vanished. So, when we finished the study initially and the 2 books were written, there were 30 clusters of disappearances in North America. Now we've identified 4 more. 3 or more missing from each cluster minimum. Maximum, there's probably over 30 in Yosemite and a few other locations. The top locations, Yosemite, Crater Lake, Mount Rainier, Sequoia Kings Canyon, Great Smoky Mountain, Glacier, and Rocky Mountain National Park. This is the map, and this is a map we keep updated of the disappearances. This is just outside of Los Angeles, some of the huge mountains that are around the LA basin. Surprisingly, a lot of kids and young adults have vanished permanently and never been found that fit the criteria. This is Yosemite. Starting right here, this is the area around Mount Shasta. And then you can almost draw a straight line up through the Cascades. And now that map would have 3 or 4 more dots in Oregon and Washington where there have been disappearances and a clusters identified. Then you curve around the north into Idaho, Montana, down through Wyoming, Colorado, unbelievably down in Arizona. On the far right, the big cluster on the bottom right is Great Smoky Mountain National Park. And then up through the panhandle of the northeastern United States, you talk about disappearances. I mean, probably now we would add another 20 or 30 in the last 18 months that aren't even on this map. But if anybody follows the Appalachian Trail, something about the Appalachian Trail and disappearances of people, and I can't put my hand on it, I don't know why, but the Appalachian Trail walks right through the heart of many of those East Coast clusters. A strange circumstance. Talk about one case that kind of epitomizes what we found in a majority of these cases. A boy named Keith Parkins, 2 years old, from Ritter, Oregon. And Ritter is sort of on the eastern edge of Oregon. He and his family went to go visit their grandparents' ranch. And there are booklets that are written for search and rescue teams to follow. And it's kind of a guideline on how you set your grids, how far out you look, how you allocate resources. So 95% of all children 3 years old or younger are found in 2 miles or less from the point they're last seen. An important statistic when you're out searching for those kids. So an article, April 11th, 1952, says a little boy ran and stumbled over 12 miles in 19 hours, was found unconscious this morning and is expected to recover. His mother said the boy has apparently forgotten his night of horror. His pants, she said, were torn to shreds, and he climbed through fences and brush in the mountains. That's a direct quote from the article. Okay. 3 years old. Okay, I have 2 kids. I remember what they were like when they were 3 years old. Could they run or stumble or walk or crawl 12 miles through the mountains in 19 hours? I want to find the kid that does that. I don't believe it's possible. How he got over fences and through creeks and rivers? How do you do that? So Keith crossed 2 different mountain ranges, several barbed wire fences, creeks, and was found in a dry creek bed. Another important statistic in these studies is that people have found in or near creek beds. But when we wrote this up, 4 of us were sitting in a room, and it's like we had an epiphany all at the same time. My question to you is, what were searchers doing 12 miles from the location 19 hours after the event? Doesn't make any sense. No sense. It makes no sense. There's no way any searcher in the world would do that. One of the most concerning disappearances occurred in my backyard, Rocky Mountain National Park. Anybody here ever been there? All right, good. So he's with his family, and he's pretty deep in the mountains. They're walking up 30 feet from a river. Mom, Dad, Alfred. And that's his picture down there in the lower right. And all of a sudden, parents turn around. This is how quick it happens, too. There 1 minute, gone the next minute. They say he was gone. Park Service, I can understand it. They immediately thought he fell in the river. So they got permission from Fish and Game to shut down the river, block it, and they searched it for 5 days. This is the actual picture of what they were searching and when they were searching. They looked under every boulder. They looked under every rock. They put a fence line and barbed wire fence at the bottom so they wouldn't miss him when he flew by, supposedly. They never found him. But they brought in some new bloodhounds, and they tracked the boy 500 feet uphill from where the parents were. But he disappeared behind them. So the parents, right from the beginning, told the Park Service that he didn't fall in the water, and they felt that an abduction had occurred. They never clarified why the abduction, but they said he was abducted. There's no way our boy's going to leave us like that. So more bloodhounds were brought to the scene, and all of them walked 500 feet up the trail and there's a fork in the trail, and they laid down. Not normal behavior. But all of them did exactly that. So as all this is going on, there's a husband and a wife backpacking way, way up in the woods. They don't know anything's going on. And as they're walking down, they're resting, and they think they hear something up above them. So the husband gets out the binoculars and looks up at this rocky crag, horrific location way up. He sees a little boy sitting on a ledge of a rock, like 300 feet above him. He hands the binoculars. The wife goes, I can't believe I'm looking at this. Look at this. She goes, oh my God. I said, well, what crazy parents would allow their kid to do that? And then all of a sudden the kids jerk back. So again, they don't know anything happened. They walk down into the park, and they just see a lot of cars and everything, and they hear a boy's disappeared, but they don't really know much. And they drive home into Denver the next day. Alfred's picture's on the front page of the Denver Post. And both of them look at each other and say, oh my God, that's the boy we saw. They drive back up into the park, they meet with rangers, and they tell the rangers that where they saw Alfred. And the location is called Devil's Nest. One thing I write about in the books is locations in the woods are named for certain reasons. Say it's Miller's Creek. Well, maybe old man Miller lived on the creek in the 1800s and he named it. The word devil comes up more than it doesn't in high altitude disappearances. And it's something that I want you to keep in the back of your mind when you're reading the books. That word devil, why did that location get that word devil? Well, initially the Park Service doesn't believe either one of them. And they separate them and they interview them independently because they didn't believe them. They both tell the same story. We saw a little boy up on that ledge. They said there's no way a boy could get up there. If we get up there, we're going to have to use carabiners and ropes, and it'll take us a day and a half, 2 days. Make a long story short, the Park Service puts 30 guys on it. 2 days later, they reach the nest. They look around for 2 days. They find nothing, and Alfred Beelart's was never found. Dennis Martin, this is the case that probably bothers me the most out of any of them, just because I've interviewed the dad. And I know the family was out and out lied to by the Park Service because I have all the reports. He was with his dad and his grandfather at a place called Spence Field, which doesn't have any public roads going to it. And it's like a big open field where people camp at, surrounded by very thick woods. And the Martins, Mr. Martin, his dad, Dennis, and his brother are just kind of running around the field, and the brothers are kind of playing. And you're going to see in these books that there's coincidences that can't be explained. And when I first read this, I read it 4 times before I could believe it. This is how strange this is. The Martins are up in this field by themselves. Nobody else is around. Another family walks up and sees the boys playing and goes, hey, we have some boys too here. Do you mind if they play together? Mr. Martin says, no, come on over and sit down and join us. And this family says, oh, my name is Claudia Martin. He goes, what? Oh, my name's Claudia Martin, and this is my husband, Ron. He goes, our name's Martins too. How do you meet? How odd is that? Just to start the story with strangeness. Boys are playing together, running around. It's getting to be like 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And they're playing hide and seek. And Dennis goes behind one bush right on the fringe of the forest. Other boys go behind other bushes. And Mr. Martin tells me, he says, Dave, it's that sixth sense that parents have that something's wrong. All the boys are starting to come out from behind the bushes, and my son wasn't. I got up and walked 40 feet right over to that bush, and my son wasn't there. 15 feet away is the Appalachian Trail going south through the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, and I took off on a dead run for 2 miles. And I didn't hear anything, I didn't see anything, and we never saw my son again. Appalachian Trail. Now, there's a whole lot of high strangeness that went on with this story. Within 3 hours when Dennis disappeared, it started to rain like it never rained in years at that park. And it rained straight for 7 days. Another commonality in many of the disappearances I write about is bad weather hits the area right after people disappear or right when they disappear. So Dennis disappears. Within 2 hours, there's 100 rangers at the location searching. Within 48 hours, there's Green Berets that show up. Now, I did a little research about this. 99.999% of the time, it's local National Guards people that come and search for missing people. Why? Because they're in the community, they're close, they're readily available. The Green Berets signed an agreement of secrecy with the government that they'll never state what their mission is, they'll never state what they're doing. Yet Green Berets fly in by helicopter within 2 days that Dennis disappears. And not only do the Green Berets show up, set up their own camp, their own communications network, they don't search with National Parks people. And at the time, the National Park Rangers weren't armed. The Green Beret were armed. And the search lasted 3 weeks. Canines found no scent. The NPS lied to the Martin family. And what did they lie about? And what did they keep them in the dark about? FBI agent shows up about 4 days into the search. And he says he's just monitoring the case. Another commonality of these disappearances. FBI never gets involved, yet they document everything. A family called the Key family, K-E-Y. The day Dennis disappeared, they come into the park and they go to the Park Service. They go, yeah, we're here with our family and we want to see some bears. So they send him to an area called Rowan's Creek, which is about 2 miles, 3 miles underneath Spence Field on a big loop called Cades Cove. And the family walks in. About an hour or so after Dennis disappears, the Key family is down below them by about 2,000 feet. And their boy stops mom and dad and says, hey, look, that looks like a bear up there. The dad says, that's not a bear. Kind of looks like a man hiding behind the trees. And it kind of looks like he's so dark we can't even see him hardly, but he's darting in between all the trees. Key family doesn't know that Dennis Martin disappeared. So at about this time, they hear a scream that they describe as the worst scream they've ever heard in their life. And it scared the family. They went back to their car and they drove home. The next day, across the front of the Knoxville Times, boy disappears in park, 3:30, blah, blah, blah. Mr. Key looks at this and goes, I wonder if we could have seen something that applied to that disappearance. So he calls the FBI and he says, hey, I'll meet you guys at the park and I'll show you where we were so you could kind of connect the grid lines. FBI agent says, no, we'll come to your house. First of all, highly weird. I'm the agent. I want to see exactly where they saw it and I want to understand it. So FBI agent goes out. Mr. Martin had an agreement with the Park Service that he would be told of any leads, anything, anywhere. A reporter picks up on this and asks the FBI and the Park Service employee investigator that went with the FBI to interview the Keys and says, hey, could this be related? They say, oh, no, times don't match up, nothing matches, forget about it. That was total crap. What happened was that the head tracker for the Park Service grabs the special agent that went and says, hey, what's the truth? And the guy tells him the timeline, tells him everything. His name was Dwight McCarter. I interviewed McCarter and I said, hey, what is the truth? He says, the truth is, Dave, it all matched up. That was the best lead we had. And unknowns to me, and I don't know why, the Martin family was lied to. And I went up to Mr. Martin, and I couldn't live with myself. I told him, hey, let's you and me walk that path directly from where Dennis disappeared down into Cades Cove. Let's see if we could do it in that time frame. They actually did it at a brisk walk. It wasn't even a run. Now, I interview Mr. Martin, and again, like I said, the worst interview you can imagine. And when I end an interview with somebody and I'm perplexed and I'm looking for leads, I always end it like this. I said, hey, is there something that is missing in the news accounts, or have I missed something in my investigation that I should know? And he looks me in the eye and he goes, no one's ever asked me that. He goes, you know the Key family? I said, yeah. He says, well, I think, Dave, you're onto something there. He says, you know what else they lied to me about? What's that? He says, well, the Keys, when they saw that thing darting between the trees, it had something on its shoulder. It was carrying something on its shoulder. And not only did the FBI not put it in the reports, but the Park Service never reported it to them. And in the Freedom of Information Act request, there isn't one mention of that Key family observation. It was only mentioned in the Knoxville Times. And nobody would know about this observation until I just told you. Now, why the Park Service and the FBI covered that up and never wanted anybody to know, I have no idea. But I can tell you that Mr. Martin told me, he says, Dave, in 23 years, I have not talked to one reporter, and I never will again. And the reason I'm talking to you is you seem like an honest person and you'll tell the truth. I go, you got that right. He goes, they've never told the truth. How would you like to lose a son and know that? This is actually a trail where Trini Gibson, a 16-year-old female, disappeared in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. That's how thick the woods are right around it. In total, 4 people have disappeared in that park and never been found. The most recent one was in 2008. That was right on the perimeter of the park, Michael Heron. Now, a very peculiar story and very disturbing involved the disappearance of a boy named Bruce Haig, 16 years old, Boy Scout. He disappeared inside the park. He was at the back of a line of Boy Scouts, vanished. They searched for him for weeks. Finally, they found all of his gear in the middle of a river on a boulder. While it was snowing, and there was 3 or 4 inches of snow everywhere. The assumption is that in the middle of this massive snowstorm, he waddles into the river, takes his backpack off, takes everything out of the backpack, and neatly puts it on this boulder in the middle of this river. They search. They decide to go upstream, and 2 miles upstream from where they found his backpack, they found Bruce Haig dead sitting against a tree, frozen to death. The disturbing thing about that story is that Bruce Haig's pants were pulled down to his knees, and his boots and socks and gloves were taken off. Now, that story may sound very, very strange, but even stranger than that is that at Crater Lake National Park, 19 years earlier, a guy named Charles McCullough disappeared. And Charles was at the lake during the winter as well, disappeared, and this was a year where they had 25-foot snow drifts around the lake. And at Crater Lake, there's one road that goes right to the lake, and then that's it. And essentially all the backcountry's closed. Charles just came there to take pictures. He didn't have any special gear, didn't have anything except a little backpack. Vanished. 2 years later in the backcountry, I think it was 8 or 9 miles from the point he was last seen at the lake, some people were hiking in the wilderness and they found some bones that they thought were human, and they called the Park Service. And 2 rangers ride out to the scene. I interviewed one of those rangers. He said, Dave, 26 years as a law enforcement ranger, I've never seen anything like this. It disturbed me and my partner so much that we pulled out of there, put evidence tape around it, and called for an FBI evidence response team from Portland to come in and work the scene because we couldn't understand what happened. And we thought it was criminal. For a 26-year ranger who's found over 100 bodies in the backwoods to say that, you know something strange happened. What they found was a giant Douglas fir tree had fallen across this little creek. On the other side of this giant Douglas fir is they find a pair of pants, Levi's, the belt buckle undone, the pants and zipper undone, and the pants, he said, it looked like the boy had melted right into the pants. They were completely right down to his socks. And he says, but you see, the belt buckle was undone. The belt buckle on the pants was undone, and the zipper was down, Dave. Remember that. And he says there was only one bone in the right leg, and it was a broken tibia bone. That's the shin bone. And he says in the socks there were little bones. He says, we never could find the femurs, the hip bones, shoulder bones, the spine. We found a small part of the skull about 15 feet away, and everything else was in the size of very small pieces of bones scattered throughout the area. He says, Dave, I've recovered a lot of people over the years, and one thing I always find boots, because boots can last up to 100 years in the wild because of what they're made of. We never found his boots, Dave. And he says that ended up being Charles McCullough in an area that was absolutely inaccessible by anybody in the winter. Even in snowshoes, he said, because of the piles of snow and the drifts were so large. Now, I almost stumbled out of my desk when I read the McCullough case and the Hague case and their similarities. And I don't know what to make of it. And as the ranger, the law enforcement ranger who's found 100 bodies in his 26 years said, that isn't normal. How he got there, why his pants were down to his socks like that, I have no idea. Now, in the books, you're going to see me talk about coincidence quite a bit. There may be coincidences, but sometimes similarities just hit you in the face and they say, that's just too common. Let's talk about Dennis Martin and Dennis Johnson. Both disappear in national parks. One boy's 8, one boy's 6. One goes missing July 1st, one goes missing June 14th. They're both wearing red shirts. Their father's first name is William. Let's just stop there. Is that enough? I mean, who could put this stuff together? Bloodhounds in both cases couldn't track. Nothing of either boy was ever found. Storm hit the area after each boy disappeared. No tracks were ever found. And you know, an unusual spin to this, and I can understand it, the fathers stayed for weeks and weeks afterwards, never giving up on their son. And for the parents in the room, I'm sure you guys understand that. I don't think I could leave knowing my boy was somewhere in the woods. Neither boy was in a clearinghouse database up until just recently. And both disappeared, this is very odd, almost in their father's presence. Now, there's all kinds of similarities that I bring together in the books. I think it's odd. I think it's odd that we have these clusters of missing people in national parks. I think it's odd that the national parks don't keep information like that. I think it's odd that there isn't a national stampede up to the front of the National Park Service by the missing persons associations demanding accountability on it. You're not going to see a lot of press about my books. But I will tell you this, that we're not done with this topic yet, and we're continuing to plod forward. Just like we found 4 more clusters, these aren't hard to find. We may be nearing an end, but it's a passionate topic, especially when you deal with kids in my book. And don't ever think, don't walk out of this room and ever believe that a child that disappears in the wild should never be found. If there's not a water source nearby, specifically. Each one of the cases we have written about, we've excluded water as the cause. So, I've used up my 2 hours. I was trying to...
I'm Edna, Keith's mother. I was visiting my parents in Ritter, Oregon, and so I said, "Oh, where's your brother?" And he said, "Oh, he went around the barn." Then we went back to find him, and he wasn't there.
According to Oregon State Police, there are 41 missing children in Oregon.
It's an unknown what happened to these people. It extends far beyond just kids.
Hundreds of people vanished from our national parks and forests under very unusual but very similar circumstances.
In a lot of these cases, search and rescue, or the volunteers searching people, have already gone over certain areas, not once, not twice, but even dozens of times. And then the child is found there, maybe a year, maybe a few years later.
I think that I'm actually sitting here holding my son. But this is what I have left of him.
We're talking about a very large, even worldwide collective of information here.
And we turned around, and here was this little toddler walking out of the fog with absolutely no clothes on at all.
Well, it's troubling. You know, I got members of my search and rescue that aren't sleeping too well.
If you have areas that you don't even know there's missing people, it makes it really difficult to reinvestigate when more information comes.
Some of these situations are so unusual you have to think beyond the bounds of what's normal.
Everybody wants an answer. Hopefully someday we'll come up with one.
Does the National Park Service keep a list of missing people in their parks?